It is very, very, very difficult to raise venture capital investment for your startup, especially right now. In fact, one of my investor friends just told Axios that this is the worst startup investment environment he's seen since the Great Recession. Woof. I'm guessing like 90% of you don't remember that period. It was no fun. Fine, that's okay. As a career entrepreneur, I wear the customer first badge, proudly. I strongly believe raising money through customer sales is the best option, and in a lot of cases, it should be the only option. I don't want to have to ignore a great startup idea because a handful of West Coast venture capitalists won't deem it investable. I also believe that the vast majority of startup ideas aren't VC investable in the first place, at least not initially. They could eventually turn out to be a massive success. They just shouldn't try to buy that success with VC money out of the gate. Now, that's not to say I don't believe in the VC model, far from it. I've been down the VC funded road half a dozen times, and to be honest with you, it's been a totally different ride each time. For example, Automated Insights could not have done what we did, using early natural language generation and Gen AI to write stories which humans could or would not write, without a capital infusion. But we were careful to raise and deploy that capital the right way. We were also very lucky because while it's certainly no longer impossible for an early stage startup to raise VC money outside the Valley, it's still highly improbable. And even when it happens, it usually happens to startups that already have customers, revenue, and solid leadership in place, all those things that make VC unnecessary. So I am, by both necessity and choice, customer first. And you should be too. But as it is with a lot of entrepreneurial advice and punditry, everyone says you should be a customer-first company, but no one actually tells you how to build a customer-first company. So here are the 3 ways I did it. Automating a service into a product is the most direct route to customer revenue, but it's also the one that requires the most technology help. So you start with a service that's both valuable and profitable. You get better and better at it, and all the while you make parts of that process repeatable and reusable. Now, it doesn't matter if your service is coding or plumbing, whatever. You evolve your approach until your service becomes quicker, more cost efficient, and can be performed by someone other than just you. Now, those people will become your employees. Then, as you automate their tasks away, you'll elevate them into knowledge and managerial positions. The first startup I joined was Financial Dynamics, a consulting firm that built custom solutions on a dedicated software package called Power Builder. Yeah, I'm that old. In today's world, this would be a Ruby shop or a native mobile app design and development firm. Now, our differentiator was that we built a number of internal custom frameworks and used those to speed and bulletproof our development cycle. Eventually, we found we were doing 80% of the work with these frameworks and only 20% true custom build. And we got the same job done in half the time. It was much higher quality and with less testing. So we decided to start concentrating on selling the frameworks and letting other consulting firms do the customization. Our margins spiked. We eliminated almost all the headaches that go hand in hand with custom service work, and we grew like crazy. So like I said, the root of the service startup doesn't have to be coding or even technology. It can be anything you can charge an hourly rate for. But it's almost inevitable that technology will be the source of the framework you build your product on, and that's where you'll need tech help. Technology allows for automation and repeatability, ultimately creating recurring revenue without additional labor costs. That's your goal. That's how you deploy tech in this case. Now, product startups that emerge from service startups are the easiest to start and fund, provided you have the service part already underway and successful. The problem is that, like most things that are easy to start, it's a lot of work to grow and sustain. It's difficult to escape the gravity of service startup economics. High labor costs, tons of administrative and management layers, low growth prospects, and valuations at only about 1 or 2 times annual revenue. But if you can evolve your service into a product, you can get acquired at a pretty good return, and you can make a good living while you do it. The most common route to a startup, believe it or not, is to innovate your way out of your day job. The majority of new entrepreneurs are spawned from the ranks of corporate behemoths, where they've been doing the same thing long enough to see all the flaws. So they find the areas most ripe for disruption and then attack those areas with new ideas. Now, my story here is a little off the beaten path. I've been doing the startup thing my whole career, and I've been doing it in a geographical location that, as I mentioned earlier, really had no startup ecosystem. So I spent a lot of time trying to make that ecosystem into something more helpful, more open, and more useful. I constantly found myself saying, you know what this place needs? Well, one day I just got off my butt and started answering the question. I accidentally built a media and data startup around the answers to that question. It was called Exit Event, and I sold it 3 years later to American Underground, a startup incubator spun out of a media conglomerate. Anyway, here's what I learned. Every company, large and small, has their share of folks looking around their vast cubicle mazes and asking that question. You know what this place needs? The best among them start suggesting answers, and, provided the company is open to change, are rewarded for that forward thinking. But failing that internal company support, or maybe just because entrepreneurship can't be contained, they'll instead opt to start their own company and go head to head against their old company. Now, these new companies rarely need funding because the customers are close by. I'm not encouraging anyone to take clients from their former place of employment, but I can't ignore that it happens a lot. Just as often, though, the new company will create new, more loyal, and more profitable customers from the prospects at the old company, the ones who never became customers because of the flaws at the old company, flaws that the new company is now in a position to fix. Now, this is not an easy path, though. It's hard, it's dangerous, and even if you can squeeze out a new company from an existing company, the old company will still be the big player and still have muscle to flex. But if you can survive those initial battles and break out and stand out, the odds of success are pretty high. Starting from scratch and reinvesting is definitely my favorite. It's the hardest route to a customer-first startup, and it's also the most fun, but it's also the most likely to fail. It's making something out of a bare-bones idea and eventually getting people to pay for it. It's the hardest route because if the idea is worthy, it's likely something that has never been done before. There's no roadmap, there's no market screaming for your product, there's no advisor or mentor who can come in and tell you how to get started. You're not only making the product, but you're making the market, the sales channel, and most of the rules. Sounds great on paper, it's freaking scary in real life. My very first solo startup, Intrepid Media, began life as a way for me and my writer friends to save stuff we wrote for other publications because, back in the day, large media companies like newspapers and magazines would pay us to write articles exclusively for their websites and then remove those articles from those websites a few weeks or months later. And that's how things worked back then. Apparently, in the early days, storage space was super expensive. My writer friends began paying me to host their articles after their public shelf life expired. Then I came up with a few ways to find an audience, some basic rating and commenting tools, then some more advanced rating and commenting tools. Then those writers started writing articles exclusively for my website. Then my site became kind of what Medium is today, but this was back in 1999. Again, I'm super old. Anyway, I kept changing the tools, the pricing, the revenue streams, the model, even the focus. Soon I was honing in on thousands of dollars in profit per month, which was way more than I ever made writing tech articles. Now, building a successful product from scratch requires a very disciplined trial and error strategy, changing and testing everything from small feature tweaks to the entire core of what you're creating. Your product could, to paraphrase an old Saturday Night Live skit, be a floor wax one day and a dessert topping the next. That's my last pre-2000s reference, I swear. What you do is you measure how much of an impact each change makes to the bottom line, how many people are willing to pay how much for it, and if they'll keep coming back every day. Now here's the catch. Unless you're independently wealthy or very, very careful, it's hard to fund these trial and error cycles for very long. A lot of these kinds of startup founders will work on their ideas during the off hours of their day job until sales spike. Intrepid Media ran profitably and growing for 12 years, but never broke through a ceiling that kept it in that quadrant of nice to keep alive, but this isn't going to make me rich. While building from scratch is the hardest and riskiest way to go customer first, it's definitely the most rewarding. You wind up with a company with VC level growth prospects, and if you play your cards right, you'll own almost 100% of it with no dilution. Here's the kicker. Any of these three customer first methods can result in companies that could take VC or other public money later on, once they've established their product, revenue, and sustainability. The great thing that happens in these cases is that the entrepreneur winds up negotiating from a position of strength. And even better, he or she will know exactly how to put those funds to work to get the massive return that all investors expect. I certainly didn't want to make it seem like any of those examples were necessarily easy for me to pull off or made me supremely rich. It's a long post. It came in just under 2,000 words, and I had to squeeze a lot of information in there really quickly. Thing is, these things happened over about 25 years, so it was certainly not fast. There's no get rich quick here, and it certainly is difficult. It's not the path least taken, certainly, but it is the highest road. You have to maintain a certain level of diligence, of care, of carefulness to pull off a customer first startup. And that comes into play in your very early days when you're sort of treasuring each customer, all the way to your late days where you're sort of pushing big buttons that can have major consequences on not only you, but the people around you and your customers. The thing about it is, though, the good thing about it is the rewards aren't necessarily more or less in the VC path. Like, you can't say one is better than the other, but the major difference is if you go customer first, how you achieve those rewards is pretty much all up to you. And that's my favorite part about it. If building your business is something you're doing or you want to do, you need to look into Teaching Startup. That's my project to provide access to actionable, insightful, and honest advice for entrepreneurs, innovators, and leaders at all experience levels, regardless of their connections or resources. Basically, I'm trying to solve everything I found frustrating when I first started out as an entrepreneur, then adding everything I've learned and am still learning about entrepreneurship, innovation, and leadership over the last 20 to 25 years, and creating a new and better solution to an old problem. So thank you very much for paying attention to this post. Please hit me with a like or subscribe to the channel, whatever you'd like to do. But if you really want to support what I'm doing here, you can help me help you by becoming a member of Teaching Startup. I appreciate you. Now go do great things.